Have you achieved success and a high income, but still lack personal fulfillment and work-life balance? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful But Struggling podcast. Join us as Erin, Eunicia, Joanne, and Mim share transformative insights and practical strategies just for you. Discover real stories and lessons that will elevate your personal satisfaction, professional accomplishment, and financial empowerment.
In this episode, at the time of this recording, it's September. And if you didn't know, September is National Suicide Prevention Month. And today I am here with Dr. Joanne Sotelo, psychiatrist and coach. And we're going to be addressing some of those issues that have to deal with mental health. And also, how does that look in physicians and other high pressure professionals? And this is a topic that can sometimes be pretty serious, Joanne. And yet, if we don't talk about these topics that can be kind of heavy or serious, then we can't do anything about them. And I believe that's why we're here, is talking about difficult subjects and being able to make them not normalized, well, maybe normalized a bit, and open the door for real conversations so we can take real action to make things better. And with that, my dear friend Joanne Sotelo, I wanted to ask you about what are some of the basics in mental health issues, especially when we're talking about mental health in physicians.
Erin, before I answer your question, let me just make a note. Erin and I were both physicians, and in here today, we will be talking about mental health concerns. So two things, you might have a lot of emotions about this topic, and that's okay. Your central nervous system might be activated, which what other people say triggered. So I have to say that out loud. And then the other thing is that we're here not giving you medical advice. If you need help, please make sure that you seek professional help. But we're here from our hearts, sharing information that's very important for us and for you as well. This is a topic that is very much so near and dear to my heart as a psychiatrist for so many decades, and in coaching like you and I have been doing. And it's worth talking about it because to sound redundant, we're not talking about it. And when you think of what's common within physicians and many other professions, especially that, like you're saying, that high stress, is that actually depression and anxiety amongst other mental health conditions are higher. And let me share some numbers. Usually depression in the general population, depending on the study that you look at, it's about 9 to 10% of the population. In physicians, it is up to 25 and to 30%. That's a huge difference. So it's not something that we just deal with every now and then, and this is throughout our career. And then if we look at the other very common condition, which is anxiety, it's about also 15 to 20% higher than the general population. So why aren't we talking about it more, right? And there's so many reasons why, we struggle, and so many reasons why we're not talking about it. The other big thing that has to, that we have to talk about, that is not necessarily a mental health condition, but it's usually so high amongst physicians, is burnout. We talked about burnout in this podcast. And right, like when you think about it, is not just that physical exhaustion, but then also emotional exhaustion. We kind of disconnect from what we do and we stop feeling that sense of accomplishment. So that's kind of, and when thinking about burnout, but severe burnout can be a really big risk factor in terms of depression and anxiety, substance abuse, ADHD symptoms, all those other things that we talk about. Then the other important thing to think of when we're talking in general terms about mental health and physicians is that we're not looking for help. And we're not looking for help partly, as you've heard me talk about before, because of that huge stigma, but then also because of that fear of professional repercussions and a more internal thing is this belief that we have, like we're supposed to have it all together. We're not supposed to struggle. Or yes, okay, I'm struggling, but I'll figure it out, which is different than what we help our patients with. But somehow we have this belief that we're supposed to move forward by ourselves. And then the work-life balance that integration is not there. That's something that we can definitely talk about. And we'll have a different episode coming up just specifically on suicide, because we know that it's, about 2%, not 2%, 2 times higher than the general population, which is horrible numbers.
So what I heard you say, Joanne, is that not only are the numbers of mental health in illnesses higher in physicians, anxiety, depression, burnout, yet there's less seeking help for those conditions, many reasons. I wonder, are there differences in mental health and how it shows up in physicians different than the rest of the population? And if so, what does that look like?
What a great question, because I like to talk about this because I, of course, recognize it or see it or feel it in some of the people I work with or some of the physicians I meet, yet we're not identifying it as depression because it looks different or anxiety for that matter. It looks different than what we learn in medical school. And if you're not a physician and you're listening to this, but you're a professional under stress and you feel like life is a little bit off balance, pay attention, because this might apply to you as well. You might be like, maybe I didn't identify it as I'm depressed because I'm not sad and crying all the time, but yet you might be struggling with this other thing. So the first one, which overlaps a little bit with burnout, is that horrible sense of fatigue and exhaustion. So ask yourself, when was the last time you said, I am so tired? I have no energy. Right? Like we hear it so commonly. But then from there, you miss out on some of the things that you might enjoy. Your motivation goes down. And then, I say it's double bad, because you're feeling exhausted and then you don't do the things that can actually recharge the batteries. So it keeps on getting potentially worse. Now, talking about the sadness, we might feel a little sad, but what we see more of actually is a sense of irritability, right? I hear, I'm so cranky. And then you feel bad about it because it's out of your character. And you come home and I'm like, I don't know why I'm fighting with my spouse. I yelled at the kids. I feel so bad. And the other side of that coin, which is actually makes me sad, it's numbness, where you skip the sadness. You went to disconnect. And usually when I see that, when I hear that, to me, it's a red flag that there might be a bigger struggle than maybe what the person is realizing for themselves. Of course, there's other things like you might not be as efficient. You might be making more mistakes. Your work performance is not as good. Another big thing that I've heard you talk about, Erin, and some of the people that you work with, is that social withdrawal. Like we isolate, and partly we isolate because we're not feeling well. But then it's also that sense of no one else is struggling with this. I'm alone. I cannot talk about these things. Or you just really don't have much left in you. You're so drained mentally, emotionally, and physically that you just don't want to deal with more people. And from there, yes.
I just want to interject here because you talked about that isolation, withdrawal, maybe not only from things you like to do, but also from the people who might be able to help you. And you probably experienced this as well, Joanne. I know for myself, when I started coaching other women physicians, I realized I never related to feeling depressed, but I can certainly relate to being irritable. Just ask my husband how many days of irritability I had and how many days of exhaustion and fatigue I had. And yet there's this badge of honor that, oh yeah, I was up all night last night on call and talking about how busy we are and the things we're doing. And yet this inability to talk about the realities of how my marriage is struggling because I am irritable all the time, because I don't have energy for my work and my relationship. The common thing though is that you may not be talking about it with your colleagues, and they might not be talking about it with you. And yet they may be experiencing the same exact thing. And for me, when I realized I wasn't the only one that struggled with some of these things, because I was having conversations with other physicians as I was coaching, it gave me a sense of, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not even different, because they're struggling too, but we're just not talking about it. So thanks for letting me to interject, but I just want people to understand you are likely not alone. And if you start more conversations and open up to people you trust, or maybe it's not your colleagues, maybe it's a therapist, or maybe it's a coach, or maybe it's a mentor or a family member, that you may not be as alone as you think you are. And when we don't feel alone, it makes it easier, I think, to then take the actions to do something about it.
Yes, no, such an important thing to make a distinction about. And I'll add another tangent. Usually we have an emotion that it's our go-to. That's kind of an easy emotion. For me, it's more of on the worry anxiety side. And of course, with all this training and coaching and my own coaching, I've learned that a lot of times when I'm feeling anxious, it's just my go-to. That's what my brain feels comfortable. But sometimes I have to say, like, is it really anxious or am I sad? I don't usually even, it's not that I've not cranky or irritable at times. I go there, but it's not always where I go. But I do have to sometimes ask myself, and the anxiety is also masking some frustration, right? So those are good questions to ask yourself. What is your kind of go-to emotion? And is it masking or in a way even numbing a deeper struggle mentally and emotionally? So it's a little tangent worth saying. And from there, I'll say something else that unfortunately I see in physicians, that it then jumps to hopelessness, which is a horrible emotion because it's usually something that comes before suicide. And a note here with my psychiatry hat on, a lot of times hopelessness is different than what's making you sad or what's making you anxious, right? Like I'll give a random example. Like if you make a mistake, like if you order the wrong medication, the wrong dose, you might be really sad or anxious, worried, all the things about that. But then if you're dealing with all these other struggles, then you might feel hopeless. But the thought behind the hopelessness is, I'm a failure. I'm not good enough. No one is going to love me. And it's important to kind of recognize what's that, because those are things that usually are more of the risk factors for suicide. And I'll say one last thing to kind of in general, but it's good to think of also all the physical symptoms that we struggle with, that a lot of times we don't know. And they could be because so many reasons, not just masking the depression or anxiety, but because we're not taking care of ourselves. We're out of balance. We're not sleeping well. We're not eating well. All these other things that are so important. So I went a little detailed there on me wanting to go in general terms for mental health in physician and other high pressure professionals.
And I just want to ask one other clarifying question. Can you be suffering from or having symptoms of anxiety, depression, burnout, and still be showing up for work every day, still getting your charts done, still having your patients care, love and respect you? Is that possible as a physician?
Oh my goodness, Erin, thank you for that clarification, because that's one of the most important things, and I forgot to say it. When you look at and I'm kind of moving my fingers in air quotes, if you look at the book criteria, in order to have a disorder, right? And I'm using the book words, not don't hear it negatively, just, in terms of a diagnosis, it'll say it interferes with functioning. And again, you've heard me say this before, this is where resilience goes against us, because somehow we still show up. We show up for work, we show up for our patients, we show up for our team. We are definitely not at our best, but in paper, we still look pretty good. If someone takes a snapshot of our day, we're doing the thing. And we're still come home and we cook dinner and we still take the kids to practice. Now, our attitude might not be there. Our presence might not be great. our energy is definitely low. And then all these other kind of symptoms can show up. But yes, thank you for that question, because that's probably the biggest thing that gets us confused. And the subconscious denial of I'm okay. I know I'm not great, but I'm fine, right? Like the fine is our bad for letter word that starts with an F. And it masks our own awareness and where we could even have that clarity so that we know that we need help.
And from my perspective, I see that the physician and healthcare provider clients that I work with, they have such a high tolerance for stress, such a high tolerance and such resilience that if we're not aware of that, it can definitely work against us. And my hope today, by talking to Joanne about this, is that we're going to raise some awareness so we can kind of tap in and say, getting curious. I wonder, this feeling, my chronic migraines, my abdominal upset, my arguments with my spouse, I wonder, could that be a sign that I might need extra help and support? And then what might that look like? So let's not ignore our own needs because we are so used to putting everyone's needs ahead of us. And with that, Joanne, I would love to hear your input about, we've talked about some of the mental health issues, what they might look like in physicians specifically or high pressure professionals. But my other question is, what can we do about it?
Yes, it's such a big thing. And I know it's in your heart and in my heart. So what can we do to help more physicians in terms of their mental health? We need to start there, what you and I are doing right now. We need to normalize these conversations and normalize seeking mental health, any kind of help there. We could create it in different ways. We could say education in terms of what we're talking about and how it shows up. What are the services? Create peer groups. Something that we've recognized that it's a struggle that I hear so much about is the concern for privacy. So even creating some help that's a little bit more private, and so that we all feel more comfortable seeking help. But we also have to remember, it doesn't have to be go see the psychiatrist. It could be talk to your colleague about what's going on and what you're feeling. Call a friend, and how powerful those peer groups can be just by our presence. So that's very important. Something that you and I have talked a lot about in here and outside in terms of our bigger mission is creating a culture that promotes more of this self-care, personal development. And this will also help us with boundaries and burnout prevention as well. So it's very, very important. And we can go into details in any of those, but I believe that those are big ones where we can start, because we could go also systemically. Sometimes I talk about this and then I hear, but what about the system? The system is horrible. Why work individually when, if I'm going to go back to the same system? And that's something that you and I have talked about in terms of, in the last couple of years, I've been through a lot of changes at my place of work as a physician. And it's so easy to just stand in, oh, it's because this has happened and we're still dealing with COVID, and, this person in leadership doesn't listen to us, or there's too many patients. And those are all true things. We're not going to minimize that those struggles can be there, and we can still stand in accountability of what we can do for ourselves and for our peers, right? You might be saying, I'm not struggling. I'm fine. Thank goodness. But I hear you, and I'm thinking of this doctor down the hall, which doesn't have their usual perk. They're kind of keep on closing their door. And if this information may be helpful for them, is this something where you can reach out as well? So, there's so much, the ripple effect is so important. It's the other thing to think of.
What I hear you saying is yes, this is true. There are definitely systemic issues in medicine. And at the same time, there are definitely strategic steps that each of us as physicians can do, be empowered to do to make things better for ourselves, whether or not we have a goal to fix the system, but that can help us create our own little microenvironment that is much more healthy.
Yes, 100%. And that's what we're here for too. If you're listening, that we want to create change, we want to bring hope, we want to take accountability as well of what can I do by myself? What can I do kind of in my small environment, right? In your clinic, with your colleagues, your family. And then when we change, that creates a bigger ripple effect that can help the system as well. And maybe if you're a leader, right? Like, and you're listening, that would be awesome if we can take some of these initiatives in that leadership command. I know I've been, part of my other mission as well, as I know you too, Erin.
Yeah. So we're talking about mental health issues. It's when we're recording this episode in September, which is National Suicide Prevention Month. We've been talking about some big issues about mental health issues. One is that if you're a physician, there are higher percentages of these mental health issues in our population, and yet lower levels of seeking care. And because for many reasons, stigma and lack of confidentiality, feeling that we're at risk with our licensures. A second topic we talked about was that mental health issues can look differently in physicians than in other people because of our training, because of our expectations. We may still be showing up for work and our family, and yet struggling with some of those mental health issues. And it's a spectrum. So it can be mild, it can be severe. And I believe that it can oftentimes get much more severe before our awareness is raised because of that resilience that's been built into us over our training. And unfortunately, so severe that for some physicians, suicide feels like their only option. And because of hopelessness, and they might have showed up the day before at work, and yet the next day something significant like that happened. So we can't just feel like, oh, we're doing okay because we're showing up to work. That doesn't necessarily rule out that things have become severe. So our hope is that this raises awareness about what different ways it can look like. And then what can we do about it? We want to be able to do something. We tend to be action takers. And one is taking the time to normalize conversations about it, about mental health issues in healthcare professionals and physicians, having peer groups to talk about, and also not only the things we can do for ourselves, but what are those things that we can do to have a positive impact in the culture of medicine? I know for myself, when I was a medical director, I made it the normal culture after our morning evaluations. We would go for a walk as staff to move our bodies, get outside, shift the energy. And that helped us come back more energized and more present for our patients in the afternoon, that little break. And so it is possible for culture change, big and small. And my hope is that we stay hopeful that change is possible. And with that, Joanne, I wonder, is there another piece of input that you would like to share with our listener today?
I will repeat what you said at the beginning of this podcast. You are not alone. And when we speak out loud about what we're going through, we give permission to someone else to do the same. So that, from my heart.
So powerful. And with that, we hope to see you in the next episode. And also, if you have a couple minutes, not if you're driving, we would love for you to rate and review our podcast. That helps us know how we're serving you, and also make a comment about what you'd like to see in our future episodes. We hope to see you next time.
Don't miss out on more strategies that will elevate you to new heights. Visit successfulbutstruggling.com now, where you'll discover exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with each of us individually. There you can dive deeper into how you, too, can take your personal and professional game to the next level. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Number 1, connect with us on the website. And number 2, tune in to the next episode.